the challenge that APAC is facing is not technological, it's basically institutional. And the other challenge is simply getting in front of a customer. And then large corporates, as you know, big corporates or utilities or government agencies are exactly the customers for these startups, right?
Right.
But
Yes.
their procurement cycles can easily for 12 to 24 months, so 1 year or 2 years.
Yes.
And then startups don't have those luxury of waiting.
Welcome to Asia Climate Finance, your front row seat to the policies, investments, and actors shaping climate business and finance across Asia-Pacific. Subscribe now so others find this essential guide to Asia's climate economy, and note the disclaimers at the end. Now over to the host, analyst, investor, and author, Joseph Giacobelli.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be listening from. Welcome to Asia Climate Finance. Today we try to tear down some unspoken truths behind the cleantech revolution. Is innovation really stalling, or are we just seeing the market reach a critical turning point? To help us navigate this, I'm joined by Samar Bey, a seasoned expert from the Cleantech Group. Samar has over a decade in the energy transition space, and she offers a crucial, on-the-ground perspective that most global observers miss. We cut through the noise to discuss why the messy middle of technology scaling is the biggest hurdle in the region right now, and why the old venture capital playbook is perhaps failing our climate goals. Why does this matter? Because without addressing the fundamental mismatch between patient capital and frontier innovation, our path to a secure, resilient energy future will be slow. It's a vital conversation for anyone trying to understand where the real opportunities for growth and impact actually lie. Please do send comments or ideas to acfpod, at outlook.com. The email address is in the show notes. Enjoy the discussion. Hey, Samar. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Joseph. How are you doing?
Very, very good. Thank you so much for making the time to join us on Asia Climate Finance. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So it's really brilliant to have you on the podcast today. To kick things off, now you spent something like a decade in the energy transition space, previously with BloombergNEF, and now leading Cleantech Group's work across the Asia-Pacific regions out of Singapore. Two quick questions on that to start. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself, something maybe beyond your bio, which will be in the show notes, of course, as usual. And also for anyone listening who may not be familiar with the current work, could you give us maybe a quick snapshot of what Cleantech Group does and what your main focus in the region is?
Sure. So maybe first about me. So I originally come from Korea, but I've spent significant time, part of my life in both Japan and Singapore. So I've been fortunate to experience like different perspectives across Asia. When I was younger, I would say, I was fascinated by this Japanese manufacturing culture. So there was like something really remarkable about precision or discipline or attention to details involved in creating something from nothing, right? So that fascinations led me to join Sumitomo Chemical. And then when I started my career, I was working in a manufacturing plant and then managing the production lines. Right. But the one thing that really stayed with me from that experience was I started with a factory, right? So factory was located in the middle of a residential area. So every day I saw how industry and local communities live side by side. Right. So that made me really think about like energy, like an industry and sustainability. And how can industries keep actually growing while reducing their impact on the environment? And that eventually kind of led me into energy transition research business at BloombergNEF, where I spent more than a decade working with some of the really hard to abate sector across Asia-Pacific. And then along the way in that experience, I realized that something very important, like people often talk about innovation as if it naturally happens on its own. So, but innovation doesn't grow like a wild tree, right? So it requires like support, capital, customers, ecosystem around it. And that's what attracted me to current company, Cleantech Group, which has spent more than 2 decades helping innovators, investors, and corporates come together to accelerate the commercialization of new clean tech technologies.
Mm-hmm. I remember I first came across Cleantech Group back, oh my God, late 2000s. So how long has Cleantech Group been around?
24 years, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
So must have quit it at the very beginning. Yeah, I mean, and I love a lot of the research, which we'll talk about in a minute. But a lot of the reports are really, really useful, and we'll have that on the show notes as well. Some of the links to the reports. Talking about reports, good segue. Now, your team recently put out 2 pieces of research: the Global Cleantech 100, and as well as the APAC, so Asia-Pacific region Cleantech 25. Now, looking at the data and the companies that made the cut this time, what were the kind of big standout trends for you? Are there any specific sectors in the Asia-Pacific region that are really punching above their weight right now? And maybe to put it into context, you may want to mention what the reports are all about, because I know it's not the first time you put out these reports. So maybe what the reports are about. And then the other questions about standout trends, as well as the companies really punching above their weight right now.
Sure. I think it's worth to touch points and what is clean tech means, right? So when we talk about clean tech, a lot of people are only thinking about solar panel or wind turbine.
Right.
When we're talking about the clean tech, we look everything from energy, transport, materials, and like chemical, water, recycling, agriculture. Right? So there's like vast amount of the technology we are looking into. But you're completely right. One thing really stood out to me this year is like how fast the market is changing. So Global Cleantech 100 has been running for 17 years. And normally companies stay on the list for a few years, right? We selected this process for 6 months and then hearing from advisors and investors recommendations, whatnot. So we go to a nomination process. And then usually those startups stays a few years. But this year, almost half of the list changed, right? And then to me, that's a sign that the market is like moving from hype to proof. And the investors are becoming more selective, right? So they want to see real business traction and then not just a good story. So that's kind of a real trend I see. In APAC, energy and then power is very, very strong. But I was also surprised by how much activity we are seeing in material and chemicals. And the big reason is, of course, AI and data center, right? So as AI grows and then power demands keep growing, and then data centers need like better cooling, materials and whatnot, right? So that was quite interesting. Another interesting area was fusion. And then Japan has been particularly very active. A few years ago, fusion, probably you know this, Joseph, like fusion was like more like science fiction, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But then today we are starting to see the actual commercial agreement being signed. So that's really, really exciting, like the changes we see. And I think more broadly, the conversation has been changed. And then I think you and I probably agree, like until 5 years ago, everyone was talking about net zero targets and climate targets, right? But then today, literally everyone is talking about energy security and resilience. So almost all the pitches is like became like changes, almost like they changed it from replacement from like the climate to energy resilience and the security.
Right. And like I wrote in my last book, Powering the Unstoppable Green Shift, I think the economics is also becoming a lot more important, which I guess is part of the energy security as well. And so my favorite example, of course, is solar hybrid projects in Southeast Asia, because now the unit cost is actually lower than coal or gas. Or is where, funny enough, I was just talking to a good friend, and we were talking about EVs, and he's been driving this beautiful Porsche Cayenne for the last 20 years or whatever. And he said it's about time to move to it. And then he said, but I've got all these concerns. And I'm go, what concerns? Well, first of all, is price, and the price is not a concern anymore. And both at the top end, obviously, it's been very competitive. But at the lower end, not just prices in China, but even out here, I mean, you can get a pretty good EV car for 20,000, 25,000 euros in Europe. So all of a sudden, the economics kind of make sense, and you lay over the energy independence and energy security, which is kind of interrelated with economics, and all of a sudden, you've got the transition happening before you know it. But I was taking away from the reports. Could you just maybe a little, for those not familiar with the two reports, explain a little bit, how the reports are structured? Is it just like a laundry list of companies? And also how you approach your decision to pick those 100 or 25 companies?
Sure. So it goes both ways. So one, we open the application for the startups. So Global Cleantech 100, it's going through the application process for anyone who is in the cleantech industry can apply for it. But we are going through this nomination process, right? So we have an advisory board who are basically the specialists of each sector, and also the investment experience, like investors who actually experience it. So we got nominations on this, and we go through this process. We vote among the advisory team, including our research team, and then we select the 100 most potential and also upcoming feasible technology providers in private company. Important thing is these are all private companies, right? So then we just select the hundreds, and then we also, of course, keep a platform for them to connect with the investor. Now, that's a global 100, and then it has been running 17 years, and then it has a reputation, such as a company like Volvo, who has been successfully actually in IPO and then in successful cases in this industry for this year. They are like, for example, they are part of our alumni, right? So those kind of things is a good example. APAC 25 is slightly different. The reason we are doing this series is because we thought that global trends are important, but people need to provide a solution for local, right? So APAC 25 is literally those companies who we think is going to lead the region in 5 to 10 years. So slightly more earlier stage than the global 100, but then APAC 25 is also the important companies list the investors should look into.
Got it. So it's very interesting. So you've got a mixture of both kind of industry people as being the advisors, as well as actual investors. So you kind of cover both the business and the finance side of things.
That's correct. Yeah.
Now, if we can move on to a slightly different topic, I guess I can call it the scaling challenge. Having monitored this ecosystem for a long time, does it actually feel harder to scale things today than it did, say, 5, 10 years ago? Or are we just dealing with a brand new set of bottlenecks like supply chain pressures or grid infrastructure?
Sure. I love this question because it's kind of what people are thinking about industry, right? Often when I go to conference, people are asking like, just let's show the 5 years charts. And if you think about the 5 years, five years ago, which is 2021 and 22, which we used to have anything under climate label was getting funded, right? So that's kind of a different time. But then if you're thinking about like the journey we went through since 10 years ago, right? And then like if you think about 10 years, that time period, we are so much more capital and much more corporates interested, and so much policy force now. So if you think about the journey of 10 years, then I think we've been actually achieved a lot. Right. But if you only focus on 5 years from the bubble that we had into, it looks like decrease, right? But I think it's more about market is not declining. I think market is more maturing. So I think this is like we have to consider about whether it is like it's, but not it's because of a market is reducing. I think it's more markets more popular and then I got bigger. So people need to actually focusing on this maturity of how to make a decision and investment. Yeah, and I think it's the changes investors are asking basically tougher questions, right? So who like they're asking questions about who is your clients? Will they pay? Can the technology like scale or can we make money? And then there's the geopolitical challenges, right? Like as you mentioned, right? So this Iran conflict is basically changing fundamental structure change in the market. So it's no longer about is like whether there's a supply chain only, like problems only, but I think it's more about we just think this clean tech is more about strategic choices. So we're no longer talking about reducing emissions, right? I think it is more about energy security, as you mentioned, and reducing dependence on imports. So I think that the conversation is slightly now completely different because the structure and market is different.
That's a great answer. From a APAC perspective, especially across markets in East Asia like South Korea, Japan, or the ASEAN region, how does this scaling challenge manifest? Are founders in this part of the world facing kind of like unique roadblocks to what we're seeing over in Europe or the US?
Yes, and I think this is the important part. I think a lot of our industry is like not rethinking this in a two sense. In my perspective, the challenge is basically twofold. So one is we already have a mature technology, like solar, EV, batteries, as you mentioned. And then those solutions exist, right? Challenge is basically infrastructure, policy, financing for deployment, right? And then also how to localize that. So we cannot really like rely on single sources, aka China, all the time, right? Our supply chain of a clean tech industry is 80% rely on China. But how basically the question is now these mature technology, how can we localize it and then divest it from not only to China, but then also producing this in locally. So that's one thing. The second thing is innovation and scaling. So I'm talking about the frontier technology, which is earlier stage like carbon removal, green hydrogen, industrial heat, long duration storage, like or advanced geothermal, for example. These like exist, but then this hasn't been scaled, right? And then I think this is where the messy middle is real, and that this is where technology is outgrow the grants, but then can't really attract the conventional venture capital.
Right.
And this is like where the catalytic capital matters most.
Talking about funding, so I'll move on to this area now. Moving on to kind of the cash side of things, because obviously you cannot scale a business without serious capital. There seems to be a noticeable shift recently where venture capital funds are getting a bit cold feet when it comes to investing in younger, early stage clean tech startup. What's driving that situation is something that you just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So what is actually, in your opinion, driving this hesitation? Is it as simple as kind of low risk appetite, or what is it driving the hesitation?
Well, I have to say that I don't think the investors have lost the interest in climate technology. But the real issue is many climate technology really don't fit in the traditional value of the venture capital model, I'll say.
Right.
So which means that, well, I often describe it this as two valleys of death.
Right.
The first one comes when company leaves the lab and need the money to prove the technology works. Right. That's one stage. And the second stage is the technology works, but then they need to a lot more capital to scale, like building a factory like XYZ, right? So many startups get stuck in between, and then they're too advanced for grants, as I mentioned, but still too risky for most investors. And then now a lot of the venture capitals are now, because of the current circumstances and market sentiment, is not really easy to raise a fund. So they're trying to just choose technology proven projects rather than early stage. Now, the climate technology or clean technologies often require a large amount of capital, especially the deep tech technologies. Like they need a longer development cycles and the more time before generating the revenue or returns. So that's very different from software startups, right? Which has a very quick return and then relatively little capital. So challenge it's not about like lack of innovation. I think it's more about mismatch between the financing structure we have and the technology we are trying to build. So we need more patient capital for this climate technology and clean technology. But then in APAC, that capital is especially scarce.
So don't European investors or capital from more general capital from Europe or capital from North America, wouldn't they look at the whole world and then just Asia is part of it? So why wouldn't they also focus on Asia, especially given that, as you heard me say before many times, even when we were working at Bloomberg, Asia, as far as I'm concerned, have a bias. I will admit that, but it's 50% of global energy consumption, more than 50% of the opportunity because of the growth rates. So is there an issue with kind of the global capital, i.e. European capital and North American capital, looking at Asia? And also, is it just an Asia-specific problem, or is it pretty much a global issue?
I think it's a global issue.
Okay.
In terms of the uniqueness of clean tech industry has. So it's a totally global issue, I would say. But then I think that there's a geographic nuance, right? Whether the ecosystem exists or not. So relatively in the current circumstance, relatively US or Silicon Valley has a multi-generation of ecosystem exist, which Asia we don't.
Yes.
Right? So that funding is like mobilizing capital is not as easy in Asia, even though there's a lot of international funders coming in, still very much like focusing on Silicon Valley or US market and then in Europe as well.
If traditional venture capital or traditional VCs are pivoting towards safer later stage bets, who is actually going to step up and fund the early stage innovation we desperately need to hit climate targets? And are governments, multilateral banks, or others actually doing enough to plug that gap, especially in the Asia-Pacific region?
I mean, this is one of the most important questions I think the industry is facing. This very short answer, just like it's probably all of the above.
Okay.
Like government have a role, like corporate have a role, development banks have a role, right? And institutions also have a role. But increasingly, I think the philanthropic organizations have a role as well. And then what we need more is, as I mentioned multiple times, a catalytic capital. And then which capital is basically willing to absorb the more risk early on, and then so that private investors can participate later. Reality is so there's no single investor group can solve this alone, right? In this very complicated, fragmented market. So if you're serious about commercializing next generation of climate technology, we need to really coordinate the ecosystem rather than isolating funding pools. So like blended finance. So there's a lot of blended finances actually coming up and in the region. And then they wanted to combine with the philanthropic capital and then also like the banks and then government is trying to work together and here. So I see it will be more potential, but then we need to more transaction. We need to have more transaction on this.
And are there enough platforms? I mean, obviously the Cleantech Group, the research that you guys do, the forums, etc., are really, it's incredible work. And again, you've got a track record of almost a quarter of a century on that. But do you think that maybe one of the lacking elements to this is insufficient platforms, perhaps?
Yes and no. I think there are a lot of platforms really focusing on infrastructure. So far that this blended finance or the philanthropic capital, which is really like enormously important job, right, Joseph? It's like this market. It's like we need to build more infrastructure, and then for the clean tech, And then we just like those capitals are going to build us the infrastructure for anyone and everyone can actually do this. But I also realize that there's not many platforms to emphasizing the ecosystem or innovation itself, right? So we need to support after the infrastructure. We need to support the innovations to actually play the role. But then that platform is extremely lacking. You're completely right. There's not like single person or single organizations providing those platforms for innovators. Everyone is doing separate things. So we need to have a little bit of a coordination and for how to effectively work together.
And do you think that some of these investors also may have a lack of understanding of fully understanding, sorry, that's redundant, but not a full understanding of what clean tech is all about? Because you mentioned before, at a high level, the high profile, clean tech is about wind turbines and solar panels, but there's a lot beyond that. I mean, there's sustainable aviation fuels, and we had a startup talking to us earlier in the podcast. You've got new air conditioning technologies, you've got marine energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you mentioned that earlier as well. So do you think that there's a little bit of a misunderstanding in terms of trying to fully understand the ecosystem and what the ecosystem is about? And one final point is, if we take AI, for example, and I think I've repeated this in the podcast about 5 times, but I'll repeat it again because I like it. If you take AI, Summer, right, people think about data centers, energy consumption, but then they don't think about how AI works with the energy transition, how it facilitates a lot of different things. For example, demand, supply, grids, et cetera, et cetera. So there's almost a fixation or lack of understanding of the full ecosystem. Do you think that's an issue? Sorry about the very long-winded question.
I don't think that's the issue, actually. I think that's, I truly believe, and then this is the Cleantech Group's actually view, is we believe that AI is connecting all the supply chain and clean tech.
Right.
Meaning that like from generation to the grid level to the cooling system materials, everything is actually evolve around that ecosystem, around AI, right? And also I think the important thing people don't really appreciate this is we can use AI to make a hardware breakthrough.
Yes.
Right? So there are multiple companies using this AI smartly in a simulations about their models of a hardware, right? And then they're just making that instead of 7 years to make 7 months, right? Then we see this R&D process is getting shorter and shorter. And I think that will be massive impact for clean tech industry. And I think it's just people doesn't really think about it because AI is just AI for us to ChatGPT, but it's actually those physical AIs or like these smart AIs who have a very trained for this expertise of physics or science can actually help us way much better and make our breakthroughs way much sooner.
What I meant, Summer, is, I mean, AI is just one example of kind of investors not fully understanding that clean energy, climate tech, clean tech, whatever definition, is actually a very, very wide ecosystem, not just a very narrow ecosystem. So that's why they may just focused on some of the more easier technologies to understand. That's what I meant. Do you think that that's a little bit of an issue? So in a nutshell, do you think education and awareness can be a little bit of an issue?
100%. Yeah. So like capacity building is a constant homework for all of us, right? In the industry. And then it's actually like letting people know that how much the definition of energy transition or clean tech has been evolved in this like decades, right? So that should be really like a fundamental understanding about, okay, not only solar and wind, right? Or battery. There's so many other technologies we can actually like label or we can help, which technology can help us reduce the emissions or help us to achieve a cleaner future. I think not many people really know that what that means or what kind of technologies because it's not tangible in front of their face. Right.
And not necessarily viewed as urgent, right? It's only urgent when there's a wildfire or a flood. I wanted to move on to kind of your outlook on things, and I had three questions there. Looking ahead, how do we begin to fix these two massive mismatches, the scaling bottleneck and the funding drought? What kind of maybe clever policy tweaks or new financial models are you seeing that could potentially act as a real catalyst here?
I was when we discuss about policy or financial models, we often, I think all of us have a tendency to ignore what startups are actually going through. So we got to think about a little bit market structure here. So let's say one startup like prove its technology in Korea or Japan or Singapore, right? You would think that next step for them is simply expanding in the rest of Asia, right? But that's often they fail.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
So
absolutely.
Every market has a different regulation and then like different certificate requirements and like procurement process and whatnot, right? So I think it's so hard for them to go to next country in Asia. And I think it's a bit ridiculous. So and then that's kind of the challenge that APAC is facing is not technological, it's basically institutional. And the other challenge is simply getting in front of a customer. And then large corporates, as you know, big corporates or utilities or government agencies are the exactly customers for these startups, right?
Right.
But their procurement cycles can easily for 12 to 24 months, so 1 year or 2 years.
Yes.
And then startups don't have those luxury of waiting, right? So really, and also let's be honest, in Asia, most buyers don't want to be the first customer.
They're very conservative.
Yes. And everyone wants to prove that the technology works, but then someone else needs to take first step.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's why you need to have like a collaboration between that and government and corporates and investors. So if there's any coordination, right, for the neighboring countries, so that we can actually have a similar regulation or similar process. And then also some kind of a cultural things and realignment or alliance of like few corporates, and then we'll take the new technology, this percentage. And then that would be really fantastic. And so government can harmonize it and regulation, corporate can play the bigger role, being a first customer. Investor can provide more patient capital, right? And then also one way to think about is basically philanthropic capital again, right? So that's like if philanthropic capital can play the role between the promising technology to overcome those difficult gap between the research to commercialization, I think that will encourage basically the market, enable the market really significantly.
Despite some of the kind of macroeconomic headwinds, you must see plenty of reasons to stay cheerful. I mean, at least I do.
Me too.
Where, Samar, are you seeing the most kind of exciting pockets of resilience or breakthrough innovation within the APAC ecosystem right now that give you some genuine hope over the next few years?
Well, it's kind of repetitive, but then I am still very excited about the role of AI. So that AI can play accelerating the hardware and deep tech innovation. And then like it's no longer about software, and then we can just make a really big change on application, interesting stuff's happening in the market already, especially around better materials, optimize industry process, right? Improving like those manufacturing like efficiency. I think those are where APAC is very, very strong. And if we can utilize that, then I think that's like a no-brainer, like really great opportunities for APAC, how to utilize this AI and then make those breakthrough. And then also the other thing is, I think the energy security, because this is probably the first time that government is not always like pro-climate, right? But then I think all of the governments basically agree with we need to focus on energy security. Right?
Yes.
So I think that's kind of that alignment creates the opportunity for a wide range of clean tech industry, right? So despite of the headlines about funding slowdowns and geopolitical problems that we see, I actually see the long term, like innovation in Asia is very strong. And I think I'm still very optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, totally 300% agree with that, Summer. And like you said before, or I'll rephrase a little bit of what you said before, which is if you look at where we are today in 2026 and where we were 10 years ago, in any area of the energy transition, any area of clean technologies, it's grown massively. And it is a transition. And transition is not linear, it's very bumpy. So maybe I have a little bit of bias, but I also think that AI is causing the market to be a little bit more short term, because you've got companies raising hundreds of billions in investment and expecting a very, very fast payback. Whereas with a clean energy technology, it's going to take years. I mean, if they survive the two values of death, as you mentioned earlier. So I think it's also because at the end of the day, clean tech is very closely related to infrastructure, and infrastructure is on long duration assets. Build a solar power plant to make quick money in 5 days, right? So I think that may influence a little bit investors today because of the quick money, quote unquote, that can be made. I'm not sure. I'm just, again, brainstorming here.
No, 100%. Yeah.
Cool. Just to wrap things up with a couple of things. One is, if you could give just one piece of advice to a young clean tech founder listening today who is trying to navigate this kind of tricky funding and commercialization landscape, what would be your advice, Sama?
I think if I could give one advice, if I have to choose one, then I would say obsess over your customer's pain point. Meaning that it's like we are living in the world that climate is probably number 5 in the investor's mind, right? Then I think we have to compete like with existing technology, and there's no green premium whatsoever. And then technology matters, but customer is the most important one in this picture. So. And the customer doesn't really buy the technology. Customer is just buy solution for the problems, right? So I would just really encourage the best founders I know is actually spend so much time understanding about operation, procurement, economics, or customers' behavior, right? That's like how they spend their time. So I would say funding is important, but funding is a means to the end. So customer value and then their pain point is the most important thing. So I would say that's focused on that. And if I can add one more thing.
Sure, of course you can.
Don't spend all your time talking to people who you already know. Right. And I think it's a lot of the founders I found is like they like to hang out with the people who really appreciate them.
Right.
But then like often they can't. This is like kind of a usual. And any people needs to actually do this, right? Stepping outside of their comfort zone.
Right.
I think that some of the most valuable insights are coming from the conversation, right? Outside of your immediate network. So that's like something that I will really, really definitely recommend for founders to consider.
That's great. On the lighter side of thing, and that's my last question, Summer. Do you have any personal recommendations for our listeners? It could be books, documentaries, films, reports, studies, or anything?
I was thinking about this, Joseph, but then I have one recommendation, a little bit biased for me because it's my good friend's work. My recommendation is almost every year, Ned Bullard, co-founder of Halcyon.
Yes.
He's making the annual presentation. And then for anyone working in climate and energy and technology, I think that's the best summary of what's happening, right? And it's incredibly data rich, and then it's very accessible. Anyone can access that. So every year I learn something new from it. So I would encourage people to spend a little bit of time going through that slide deck that Nat was building. And also I would also encourage people to talk to innovators, talk to startup. Some of these reports are great, right? And then some of this valuable insights is great. But real story is coming from the startup founders, right? Or operators. So they come from people who are actually building stuff. So data and reports are the story after it happens. So if you want to hear actually what's happening in the future, then talk to those founders. And that's like my recommendation.
How would someone access some of those thoughts from the founders? I mean, apart from directly speaking to them, maybe conferences, I guess. One of the Cleantech Group conferences is one way.
Yes, like events and networking. There are a lot of networking going on in innovation in every country. Right. So if you're interested, then feel free to tap into. There's a lot of NGOs and NPOs network happening. Startups, founders always thirst for the networking, right? And then I would definitely just tap into those like monthly gathering or quarterly gathering. Conference is a great platform.
Right.
Join Cleantech Forum if you want. But it's like definitely, I think the events and networking sessions, and then reach out to that directly. LinkedIn is great platform, right? But then if you're interested in a clean tech industry, then definitely tap into the local innovation field. There is always a clean tech specialized networking happening. So that's like somewhere I'll recommend people to chat.
Great. So I'll put both Nat and your presentation link on the show notes. Actually, when I first joined Bloomberg back in 2013, Nat and I sat very, very close together for about a year. And then I learned after a year that he's actually fluent in Italian. One of his many secrets. Yeah, he's very fluent in Italian. And I also put the links to the Cleantech Group's forums because I believe you have them in North America, you have them in Europe, you have them in Asia, and those are very, very, very useful. I had the pleasure of attending a couple in the past. So that's great. Summer, thank you so much for the conversation. I think the conversation should have been much, much, much longer, but I don't want to abuse too much of your time because I know you're busy. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for your participation in Asia Climate Finance.
Thank you so much for having me. And it was a pleasure. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
Please note that the Asia Climate Finance podcast is provided for educational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Any information discussed should not be relied upon for making investment decisions. Listeners should always seek advice from a suitably qualified and authorized investment professional. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of their current or former employers or of the podcast host or producers.